G'day nerds, it's wonderful to be with you here on what turned out to be quite a frigid Brisbane morning. Very excited about today. I'm joined by a legendary friend of mine, Dave May, who's one of the few people to have actually gone hands-on with the newly announced Canon C70. He's with us here. Dave, can you hear me? Just nod your head to make sure everything's good to go. Yes, great. Just making sure, because, you know, these things can all be a little bit of a last-minute rush. As you can see, it's the usual nerdy setup here. I think I might just quickly take you through the cameras I'm using. Is almost like declaring a conflict of interest, as if I'm a politician that's about to run for office. Remember when they used to do that? Good times. So just going through quickly what we're working with. The A cam that I'm staring into right now is a Canon C500 Mark II, which was purchased in no small part due to influence from Dave May, who we'll be talking to shortly. So as a Canon ambassador, he's really done his job there. Camera B is a Komodo running an 85. Oh, sorry, I should say, if I jump back quickly to the C500, that's a Canon L series 24-70 2.8, and the autofocus on the C500 is just simply ridiculous. And tell you what's just caught up to it is this bad boy. G'day, mate. How you doing? As of an hour ago, the new firmware for the Komodo made autofocus, continuous autofocus, phase detect actually pretty useful. Whereas previously it was a little bit rough. So you can see there, I can throw my hand out, bring it back. Oh, isn't that nice? It's probably a good time to bring up my title as well, just to familiarise yourselves with who I am. Dan, nerd wanker, camera tragic, and in a past life, I was a saxophonist. Whew, boy, it really feels good to get that one off my chest. I mean, we're all family here, right? We can share those kind of things. So yeah, I think it just really brings us all together. Moving right along, camera 3 is actually a Monstro running a Laowa Super Scope, so that I can be a wanker using this Kessler Crane second shooter, which should be going any second now. Come on, you can do it, buddy. You can do it. There it goes. So we can cruise in on little devices here just to give you a few updates on new accessories that have come out for the Komodo, and obviously get quite close to things thanks to the beauty of the Laowa Super Scope. So we'll play around with that later. It's just an excuse, once again, to be a total wanker. And because I had a little bit of extra time leading up to this from at about 4 a.m. this morning, I thought it'd be useful. Normally I've got my little phone that I can wirelessly send through to the live stream. For various reasons I won't bore you with right now, that's not possible currently. So instead I built a little bit of a Franken rig using this Marshall CV503, which is a little witness camera up the front there that I use for vehicle tracking and things like that. So if I just show you that one, you can see we'll be able to go through and have a look at some of the nerdy features of the live stream setup here. You can see it's just gear central, as it always is. You can see my little Stream Deck XL here I'm using to control things. Because I am a complete wanker, I've even put Dave's photo in the button so that I know just who it is that I'm talking to. And we'll get to that very shortly. We can control our content pieces and mute our audio and all kinds of cool shit there. So that's a little bit of a rundown on the gear setup we've got here. We'll get into that a little bit later. Really important little test run today is the Q&A feature. So I do a lot of soul-destroying corporate work. For those clients that need big events and things like that, I use a product called Slido, which allows for people to interact with an event from anywhere in the world, pretty much just using a phone. So without further ado, if you want to grab your phone, open up a phone browser, type in sli.do and enter the conference code, the event code rather, which is 13528. I'll just show that up on the screen now, so you can see that we've already got a few questions in that we're going to get to. So thanks very much, Anonymous. Anyone else that feels, you can feel free to pop your real name in there, and we'll be able to, you know, give you a shout out. But Anonymous, great work regardless. And we're going to throw a few polls at you later on to find out how you guys feel about these products that we're going to talk about. So by all means, join in on Slido and throw us some questions. We're live on Facebook and YouTube, and that little service means that we can have Q&A with people regardless of which platform they're running from. So look, without further ado, I think it's time to bring in our guest. So let me give you a quick introduction about Dave. I'm just going to jump into the Komodo here and bring up Dave's showreel as I give you a quick brief on who this guy is. He's based in Sydney, Australia. I met him a few years back through Triple J, which is our national broadcaster specialising in youth-oriented music, which I'm almost out of the demographic of. Okay, I'm actually totally out of the demographic of. But Dave's an excellent shooter who's a director and a cinematographer. Really shoots Canon quite a lot. Like I said, he's the guy who got me into Canon. He specialises in probably documentary and factual content, but he's done some really great stuff in the music industry, including with one of my favourite Australian bands, Mansionaire. He's done a lot with them. And Dave and I also worked together recently on this piece at the Sydney Opera House for John Hopkins for the International Piano Week, something like that. Dave will fill us in. Dave directed that one, and I shot it on the Steadicam with the Monstro and Atlas Orion lenses. So yeah, we've known each other for a little while now, and like I said, Dave is the first guy to go hands-on with this very exciting Canon C70. So look, enough blather from me. How about we bring him on in here? Dave, let me get rid of that. How you doing, buddy?
Oh shit, that was good right up until you hyped it up like that. Now I feel I'm out. See you guys.
Oh, stop it. No, stop it. It's great to have you, man.
Dude, thanks for having me. I thought it might just be worth mentioning. I don't know if it's something that's easily fixed. There's a little bit of distortion coming through your mic, but you know, it's not too bad.
I can fix that
it now in case it's an easy fix.
I can fix that.
But yeah, man, thanks for having me on. And I think it's really interesting because I remember coming across your stuff a long time ago because you made this music video for Violent Soho for Sarah Mona Said. And I remember that along with that video, you actually put out one of sort of the first like camera breakdown videos I remember seeing on the internet and getting really into, where you sort of broke down all the ways that you had broken your body and equipment filming this clip. And it was interesting because I think now a lot of people take for granted that if you do some really ambitious video, the behind the scenes content is like a huge part of that. But I remember this was like in 2014 or 2015, and I hadn't really seen anyone being so open about their process on that stuff. So anyway, when we actually got to start working together, it was a huge, it was a real thrill because I remember watching your stuff back then and going, holy shit, this guy has so much equipment, but also this really, your enthusiastic approach to doing stuff that was pretty low budget and still trying to make it look $1 million. I think that's awesome.
Thanks, man. That's very kind. It's sad that we're not able to work together as closely at the moment thanks to COVID, but hopefully we're going to be able to get into that. I'm sure people have had enough of that love in and want the two of us to get a room, but it's clear that we're big fans. So look, I think at the moment, why don't I get into C70? You are a Canon ambassador, deservedly so. Like I said, Canon, if you're watching, Dave's definitely confirmed at least one C500 Mark II sale. Thanks very much. And so deservedly, Canon gave you one of those early attempts to play with the C70. I guess before we get right into the nerdy details and specs of it, why don't you give me like an emotional reaction, having played with it for a little while now? How does it make you feel on sort of a scale of, say, from meh to nerd boner? Like where along that continuum would you say that you are?
I'd say definitely like a nerd stiffy, because I think like a lot of their cameras Canon of the last year, Canon seem to have had a bit of a change of direction as a company. The one thing that is probably worth mentioning is that I guess in terms of being a Canon ambassador, I'm just have a really good relationship with the guys I deal with here in Sydney. And what that kind of meant is over the last little while, when there's new gear coming out, they'll give me a heads up. This C70 stuff and the C300 Mark III stuff was sort of the first time that I guess I've been brought in at that launch level to help them make content for the launch. But I think what's kind of good for me is that I've never been in a position where I felt like they're dictating the way that I'm going to use or talk about the products.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because, I've shot FS7 on a lot of shows. I shoot with Alexas. For me, I think I'm valuable to them if people see that I can be honest about the stuff rather than having to walk the party line. So there's certainly downsides or cons to every camera out there. And I'm not shy about talking about what those features are, because I think that, people can see through bullshit pretty quickly. So I actually love using the cameras genuinely. They don't pay me to do stuff like this. They kind of just give me a heads up when they've got gear coming, and, occasionally I do talks for them and things like that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that don't worry too much about me being a giant corporate shill. Obviously, like using them and enjoy it. But yeah, I hope that people can get the feeling that I can be pretty honest about, the good and the bad as well. As far as using the C70 for the first time, it was really interesting because when the R5 and the R6 got announced, those cameras are phenomenal, but my God, like what a misstep in the way that they marketed them, or making this huge deal out of the 8K and trying to position it as like this video killer when, the internet will tear you to shreds, even if there isn't stuff that's wrong. And when there is stuff that's, this overheating stuff or the heat limitations, that really knocked them. And I think it was probably a good lesson for them not to take some of this stuff for granted. So what's interesting is I think a lot of the R5 and the R6 users, had they announced the C70 at the same time, probably would have been, I don't know marketing strategy, but that feels to me like maybe a way to have avoided a lot of that blowback, because the C70 is the DSLR mirrorless sized camera that's dedicated to video that I think a lot of that market probably wants, or needs. They don't want to spend, $16,000 to $25,000 on a C300 Mark III or C500 Mark II. They want something that's this big, and they don't want recording limits. They want it to be very video focused. So anyway, it was just interesting to see that when they announced the C70, I thought, oh my God, like this is such a good idea. I just wish that they had teased the existence of it 6 months ago when they first told people about the R5, because that would have helped them say, hey, if you do stills and video and like stills as a priority, then, the R5 is the camera for you. But if you actually just want compact video and for it still to be really high quality, we've got something coming. Don't stress too much. But, you live and you learn. And at least that the product that they have announced is actually, from what I can see and my usage of it, something worth getting really excited about.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And hey, I apologize if earlier on I set you up as being a corporate shill in the intro. That's definitely not how I know you. And
it's more just I've had to actually take a second and think about what my relationship is for Canon in a lot of the YouTube comments on the stuff, because people see these videos and Canon paid me and my team to make that music video and that promotional video. But I think people might have this idea that when I jump on News Shooter or do something like this with you, that like I'm getting those big Canon dollars. For like, it's like, no, like I got paid to make a video and I do this stuff because I enjoy it. And I just think that that's worth kind of pointing out. I wish that like they had that kind of money to put me on a retainer or something to do media appearances, but it is not the case.
No, all good, man. Well, I think for me, oh, hello, autofocus. There you are. G'day. How you doing? I think when I first saw it a few days ago online, the gut reaction for me took me back to, what was it, 2009, 2010, when the 5D Mark II first came out, and bloody Philip Bloom took it out on the street with a 50mm 1.4. I think it was in New Orleans, and shot this content that everybody just lost their shit, like completely lost their minds, because it was full frame, ridiculously shallow depth of field. Everyone freaked out, and overnight this like insane cottage industry blew up of all these third-party companies trying somehow to make this stills body shootable for a cinematographer. And then when I saw this camera the other day, it kind of looked like a 5D that had been, doing CrossFit and eating all of the steroids. And it sort of had like all of the bits on it that you wish the 5D did back then. I remember back when it came out, I was into REDs by that stage, but it was only probably 5 years earlier that I was shooting on a Canon XL2, which is sort of like the go-to camera for documentary and factual back then. And I remember thinking, you're the same company. Like, surely you guys can get together in a room and the 5D sensor guys can talk to the XL2 guys and say, hey, let's jam this sensor in that body. And what are we, 12 years later or something like that. And it's sort of just gotten to that point. So I think, I'm really excited by it. Like, I have just bought a Komodo. I own a C500. I kind of see that C70 as being the perfect accompaniment to the C500 when I'm out doing my kind of more documentary factual stuff where I need to be up and running quickly. I need autofocus. I need something compact. I think it's super exciting, and we should get deep into it. Before we do, I think let's just test out this little bit of interactivity. Let's see what happens. And what I'd like to do is just ask everybody, if you jump on your Slido, if you've got that in front of you, we'll see if this works. We're going to ask everyone, with a gun to your head, which of these two cameras would you choose? A, the Canon C70, 2, the RED Komodo, or 3, I reject the premise of the question. So we'll just run a little bit of music while you guys have a play with that. totally understandable if people haven't managed to get onto Slido. I know it's pretty geeky stuff. Looks like we've got a response there, so big Komodo fan, terrific. While people are having a crack at that, we'll just jump back and have a bit more of a chat with Dave. So do you want to tell me, I guess, first impressions of how it actually felt using it in anger, like using it on a shoot, like the one you just did?
Actually, one thing that's probably worth, I might take a step back, and actually, I should have said it earlier. Like, I'm sure a lot of this audience is well aware of what the C70 does, but I think it might just be worth giving a real top line overview of where it is, what it is, where it fits, and like who it's aimed at. Basically, the easiest way for me to think about it is the C70 is a miniature C300 Mark III. It's that sensor and a lot of the camera's capabilities in a really compact, small body. The idea being that if you are someone who wants to do kind of quick, nimble shooting, you like a mirrorless or a DSLR form factor, but you want full video features like built-in ND filters, XLR audio, that kind of stuff, then you've got a video camera that now fits that workflow, but doesn't seem to really have a lot of the drawbacks you'd associate it with DSLR stuff. No more variable NDs on the front of the lens. So that's kind of what they've done. I think it's going to be about like 8,800 Australian or something like that. So it's about half the price of the C300 Mark III. But yeah, it definitely feels like they're gunning for, if you're a wedding shooter and videographer, you don't necessarily now have to roll it all on your stills camera. Now you can keep that same kind of workflow and form factor, but do it on a small camera. And what's interesting is I think that they could sort of have gotten away with less, but they really have kind of crammed a lot of the features of that higher end camera into this body, with the idea being that it could also work quite well as a B camera or a C camera if you have a C500 Mark II or a C300 Mark III. So it sort of hits two markets. It's sort of like the first step into the C series line, or it's an additional body if you have some of those cameras already. So that's sort of where it sits. So using it now, I kind of take these cameras for granted a little bit because I've got a C500 Mark II and a C300 Mark III. So I kind of approach it sort of knowing that the menus are going to be what they are, and there's a lot of stuff I take for granted. With this camera, it really feels like a C300 Mark III in a tiny body. Super 35 sensor that has 16 plus stops of dynamic range. From what we could see, it's pretty much, looks exactly the same as the C300 Mark III in terms of picture quality. James Gilligan, who's a mate of mine, who's a colorist, when he was working on the behind the scenes video, he did seem to feel like maybe the C300 Mark III files would hold up to a little bit more of a, manipulation in post. So there might be some like slight difference in that end, but as far as picture quality goes, like it looks pretty much the same. It was just really easy. Hey, like I started using C100s when I worked at Triple J, that live music broadcaster. And I got quite used to this idea of shooting, like same as sort of the RED, like with the camera in front of you, not necessarily on the shoulder. And it's some people say you don't want to be doing that for a long period of time because it'll fuck up your back or something. But it actually felt really easy and intuitive to have the camera here because it reminded me of, the 70 or the C100 or something. And it was kind of nice to be back in that world a little bit. Small body, good form factor. And I think that they know that that's how a lot of people are going to use it. I'm sure there are going to be people who want to rig it up into shoulder stuff and whatever else. But, it's got this really, this sort of 6-axis in-body stabilization and all this kind of thing. Because I think that they're thinking this is a handheld shooter's kind of run and gun camera. So yeah, picture quality, just, no surprises whatsoever. Totally stacks up with the C300 Mark III. Form factor, totally great, really easy to use. There's some nice surprises that I can get into about things like battery life and whatever, where because it's got such a low power draw, you're looking at like 400 minutes out of a big Canon battery, which
That's insane.
Is that like 5 hours? It's more? It's a lot of battery. Like you start thinking about stuff like that and go,
3 hours,
shit, like,
40 minutes.
Really handy. So yeah, first impressions were great. And then we sort of worked backwards a little bit going, here's the camera, here's how big it is. We could make a video that you could shoot on the C300 Mark III. We could make a video that you could shoot on other cameras, but what's the sort of stuff that would lean into what this camera offers? And so for us, that was okay. Multicam, because we've got timecode sync. Multicam, with audio, because timecode to separate audio is really handy. something that we can be kind of quick and nimble and can get us to maybe a slightly harder to get to location, pretty easily. And that's sort of how we arrived at, let's film a live music performance, which is what we sort of did for the promotional video.
That's awesome, man. Well, during that time, we've had a few responses come in on Slido. So just so you can see where the audience is at, we're looking at about a 70-30 split. Obviously, it's favouring the RED Komodo, probably because most of the videos that I've made so far in the short lifespan of my YouTube channel have been very heavily RED Komodo featured, but good to see there's a little bit of interest there on the C70. As you said before, neither of us are shills. We're both just interested in making cool content and using the best tools for the best job, and there's not always one tool that'll do everything. So for me, I like to have a bit of a quiver of options, budget permitting, to mess with. So I reckon this is probably a good time to get super nerdy. Thanks to everybody on Slido who's participated there. We'll keep throwing some questions at you, so have those phones at the ready. Let's jump into the specs of these two cameras. So a little bit of transparent graphics, like a total wanker. We've got the RED Komodo.
It's blowing my mind. The level of,
and look, it even works over your shot. So yeah, we can talk through how I'm doing this later. This took me a while to figure out, but there you go. The graphics sit on top of everything. So you've got the Komodo there on the left, Canon C70 on the right. You can see the price. I mean, we're still TBD on the Komodo pricing. What I've heard is something around 7,000 US. Actually, no, that's not right. No, it probably is more closer to 6,000. And then if you're like me and I should have grabbed it. If you're like one of those assholes who bought one of the hydrogen phones, which is basically a paperweight or a projectile to throw at people that you don't like.
Why would anyone do that?
I know. That it actually qualifies me for, I've got two of them. It qualifies me for a discount and an early camera in the production run, provided that they stick to what they said there. They've been really good about that kind of stuff. So hopefully that's going to go ahead. So it could be as low as 5,000 US, depending on where you're coming into that situation. And you can see there 5.5 for the C70 US dollars. So just running down the specs really quick, pretty comparable sensor size. The Komodo is actually a little bit bigger than Super 35. We get 6K out of a Komodo, whereas it's 4K out of the C70. Dave, jump in here if I've got anything wrong, because you know this better than I do on the C70 side.
No.
RF lens mount for both of them, which is a very positive step into the future. EF's done and dusted. We can still adapt those lenses onto these cameras, but there's a lot more tech that's not even really released for RF mount that they're kind of teasing into the future. So there's so many ways you can adapt it because of the short flange depth on the RF. The Komodo wins on shutter, on the shutter system, because you do have that global shutter, which, to be honest, it's not something that I've been able to give a massive run to. I'm going to be doing some videos on that soon, doing some dancing in front of a strobe light, obviously, and some other high impact movement tests to see how that global shutter pays out. But I can already feel that there's a little bit of a difference with Komodo with global shutter. It's just the cadence that feels a little bit different to what I'm used to previously. And you've got a standard read reset sensor on the C70, which obviously can introduce rolling shutter. While we're on that, Dave, did you notice anything rolling shutter wise on the C70 when you were playing with it?
No, nothing that'd give me pause. It feels, like I said, in that sort of sensor side of things, it feels pretty much the same as the C300 Mark III. I'll be interested to see what, I think it's Cine D. Those guys seem to do like some pretty amazing rolling shutter tests, and the Canon ones seem to have done pretty well out of those. So yeah, I'll be interested to see how it stacks up. To me, it felt pretty good. Yeah,
nice. I mean, Canons for me have generally been pretty good. Obviously, not counting the old 5D Mark II days, but on all the cinema cameras, it's excellent. My Monstro, given it's such a massive sensor, has way bigger issues with rolling shutter than my C500 full frame does, for instance. Frames per second, the Canon C70 pretty much holds the Komodo down on the mat and ground and pounds it on that front. You get a max frame rate at full window of 120 frames a second, which for a $5,500 camera, I think is bloody awesome. The Komodo, you're talking about 50 FPS, and there's an asterisk there because that's only if you go 6K 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio. So you've got to reduce the height to be able to squeeze out that full 50 frames. Codecs-wise, Komodo, I think, is a winner here. I mean, ProRes is a beautiful codec if you want something baked in or cooked, as I say. RAW, Red Code RAW, I've always believed, not to be a fanboy, is the greatest codec on the planet. The most flexible, the lightest data rates, and the most you can do with it in post. So that's a massive win for the Komodo. But no slouch there on the C70. There's a lot of variations of XAVC. For quick and dirty stuff, you've got your H.264. Is that 8-bit, Dave, the H.264? Do you happen to know?
That's a good question. It's definitely 10-bit across the board. I don't think there are any 8-bit codecs included in there, but I don't know whether that's H.264 or H.265. But I think XFAVC, 10-bit for sure. Don't know if the H.264 is 8-bit, but I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that Canon has kind of pretended 8-bit is a thing of the past.
All right, cool. Well, maybe that's a question for anyone on Slido who wants to jump on Google and figure that out and hit us up in the comments.
Dan, I should also say, I'm just seeing on the YouTube stream, there's a couple of comments coming in as well. I don't know if you can see those, but Mansionaire says they like how you say flange depth.
Oh, thanks, Mansionaire. Oh, look, I'm just honoured that they're watching. That's a bit of a fangirl moment for me. Yeah, there's a lot of other double entendres that come to mind in the film industry. I'm sure they'll come out later. I also want to thank, I think it was an anonymous in the Slido comments who said that the windsock on the end of my super expensive microphone looked really stupid and that I should take it off. And look, that's the bi-directional nature of what we're going on here. Isn't it beautiful that someone can give that feedback and in real time I can respond to it and hopefully look less shitty. So let's keep diving down the spec list real quick. On the audio,
is this a good point? Oh no, sorry, you've got to hit the audio on those things. I apologize, I jumped in too soon. Continue.
No, that's cool, man. This is free flowing. You jump in anytime you want. Audio side of things, the Komodo's got 3.5 mil. I think you can do, what's that thing where it's like it delivers some kind of power over the 3.5 mil for lightweight sort of, mics that need power, plug-in power, I think it's called. But yeah, nothing really professional on the Komodo side. So the C70 really wins out there. Mini XLR, I'm okay that they're mini. That's fine by me. You're still getting XLR and you still get phantom power. That's correct, isn't it, Dave? You get phantom on those audio. Yep, sick. Nice one.
As far as I know, Mini XLR, I haven't really used it that much, but it's, for all intents and purposes, the same as normal XLR. It just is a different size, so you can use an adapter or a smaller cable.
Nice one. Okay, cool. So yeah, on the audio front, I mean, my C500, anything where I don't have an audio guy with me, I'll generally grab the C500 just because I know it's got limiters, it's got phantom power, it's got XLRs, everything I need, and you're probably in the same kind of situation with the C70. So I think audio win for Canon on that front. Autofocus. Now, I've said not yet over on the Komodo because I made these graphics at 4 a.m. An hour later, RED emailed me and said there was new firmware for the Komodo. And as you can see, let's just clear that off for a second. Look at that. Look at that. Continuous autofocus. On an 85 mil, 1.4.
Clear to me, Dan, that you have a direct line to RED.
Look, it's happy days.
You wished it and it just happened.
Yeah, I'm a really cool guy like that. So just bring up where are we? Here we are. So autofocus, when I've said not yet, incorrect. It is working. Look, Red's admitted themselves they're not going to be on the same level, the same playing field as Canon when it comes to phase detect autofocus or whatever other technology they might be playing with. They're 10 years behind on that front, but they seem to be doing a pretty good job so far. But look, half the reason why I bought my C500 Mark II was how bloody ridiculous the autofocus is. My career never even had autofocus in the picture for like the last decade. And then suddenly this camera comes along and I'm like, oh, really? Well, I could actually concentrate on interviewing the talent that I'm talking to and not have to worry about whether they're sharp or not. These kind of things are surprising the way they kind of change your workflow and your mentality on shooting. So look, I think it's a safe bet. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dave. You've played with it. It's a safe bet to say the C70 kicks the Komodo's ass currently when it comes to autofocus?
Yeah, I'd say, I think it's actually amazing that a RED has autofocus at all. But the Canon autofocus, it's one of those things that they've really just held on to as the industry leaders. That was sort of on the C300 and the C500, it's still better than the FX9, which would probably be the closest competitor in video. And now with the C70, they've even upped it again so that when someone's back of head is turned, the focus locks on. The FX9 does do eye detection autofocus, but other factors sort of, from what I've understood, make that maybe less reliable than Canon's normal face AF. Because a big part of it isn't just keeping someone's face sharp, like I'm using this at the moment. A big part of it is also how it tracks and what kind of speed it tracks, because nothing sort of ruins a shot like shitty AI autofocus pulling in and out. Too slow, too fast, whatever. It's about the smoothness of that response as well. So anyway, I think, Canon's probably going to hold on to that autofocus crown for a little while yet, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think that's a very fair comment. So just quickly racing through the rest of the nerd specs. Built-in ND, typical RED, no. Maybe DSM-C3, we're going to see them finally embrace that. They've always been a little on the arrogant side when it comes to built-in ND. They've for some reason felt like it wasn't for their market, but there's plenty of people who'd love to have it. The Alexa Mini killed it, I think, in the commercial market because, in no small part, thanks to its built-in ND. And sure enough, the C70's got it. And it's up to 10 stops, which is great. How did you find the ND in your experience, Dave?
It's actually my favorite thing about all these cameras. I shot a series a little while ago now on the FS7, and the director really wanted everything to be wide open in full sunlight. So we're talking 1.2 all the time. And it meant that we had to use the FS7's max NDs plus a variable ND on the front of the lens, plus a speed booster. And by the time you're sort of going through that many layers of ND and whatever else, it really degraded the image. So for me, being able to go up to 10 stops internally with that ND, I couldn't go back. I really would love it if it was a variable ND, but I would take the fact that it's a higher level of ND over that any day. So yeah, big fan of that feature.
And variable NDs suck because they make everybody's skin look weird, and then you turn it too far,
well, the
and suddenly you get
does have,
in the middle of
it seems like they've managed to implement a variable ND that in practice works quite well. The only problem they've had is that it fucks up when you're using polarizers as well. It's some kind of variable polarizing thing. So basically, if you want to use the FX9 with a polarizer, which a lot of documentary people probably do, you can't rely on the variable ND that's in the camera, which that's a bit of a unfortunate thing, I think.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think variable NDs are actually two polarizers crossed over, so back to front, and then by rotating them, that's how you get the increase in light drop. So shoving another polarizer in there, it sounds like that'd be a good reason for it to get funky.
But I think they made a big deal out of the fact that it wasn't. They made something saying it's a liquid crystal ND and that it was sort of free from that stuff. But I'm not here to shit on other cameras. It's just interesting because when you make these, it's all about what's going to be the best for documentary filmmaking. And the FS7 for a long time just made sense. You had high frame rates. You had, it was a really robust camera. And I felt like the FX9 had a pretty clear runway to be that again. But small things like that, where it just stops you from being able to rely on the equipment in the field, that's the kind of stuff that you go, look, that's probably not going to make sense of my workflow.
Yeah, fair call. Just quickly finishing off, there's a bunch of questions we're going to get to soon, so just quickly finishing off the spec list. Media on the Komodo side, we've got CFast 2, which, isn't cheap, but it's pretty reliable, but there's just the one slot. So Canon, I feel like kind of wins here for this kind of price point, being SD, a little bit more cost effective, and you got two slots. So that I feel like that's possibly a win for the Canon. On the power front, the Reds, someone gave me a reason for why they chose these old BP 955 and 975 batteries that come from like the old XF or X something range of camcorders. So it just felt like a little bit of
also the ones that the C100 used before it went BPA?
Yes, you're right. Yeah, that's right. So
weird. It's an interesting choice.
Yeah, and they're now basically like rolls of toilet paper at the start of COVID. Like if you've got yourself a stock of 955s, you can get yourself a sweet eBay store and just start killing it. Like you could sell those for $5 on the dollar. On the Canon C70 side, big win there for anyone who's already in the Canon ecosystem. They use their not cheap, but extremely good BPA batteries. So, for instance, I've got a whole bunch of them for my C500. So you've got a nice crossover there. And like Dave said before, on the bigger BPA 60, you get 400 minutes, which, if my maths is right, is 3 hours and 40 minutes out of one battery. That's bonkers. And last, a little kind of random spec in there, Anamorphic. On the Komodo, not officially, or not at all actually, but they've said it's going to happen. I shot a music video on anamorphic lenses with it a few weeks ago, and we just basically de-squeezed on the monitors to be able to see the image. You got this ridiculously wide image, and then zoom that in post 2 times, and then I actually had the ability to rack and choose which side of the anamorphic I wanted to use for the shot, which was kind of cool. I haven't done that before. I even had one shot where I keyframed it and went from someone over here to someone over here in the middle of the shot, and it kind of looked like a pan. So that was cool. Yeah, pretty nerdy. And on the C70, sort of. Now, to be honest, I kind of forget this side of it. Do you happen to remember what the anamorphic implementation is at the moment, Dave?
Yeah, same as the C300 Mark III. So it's got de-squeeze options in the camera, so 1.3 and 2 times. I don't think it's 1.5 or 1.8, those different sized anamorphic desqueezers, but I guess the big thing there is that resolution and sensor height are going to be the drawbacks, because you can desqueeze it and sure, you can get an anamorphic image, but by the time you get it into the computer, you're going to chop some stuff off and lose some resolution. The C500 Mark II, because it's 6K full frame, when you do that sort of desqueezing, you are actually going to maintain a sort of true resolution. Now, I should point out, I have shot anamorphic on the C500 Mark II for the John Hopkins thing we did together. Looks great, but it's not a world that I've really explored with the Super 35 cameras with these 4K sensors. So yeah, it's there in a capacity and you could use it, but I wouldn't think that it's true anamorphic or anything like that, where you could deliver it to Netflix and maintain a 4K image.
Yeah, I did a Violent Soho clip where we shot the choruses of it on Monstro and C500 anamorphically, and I've got to say, getting these C500 to match up from both a geometry standpoint and a color standpoint was a mission. Like if you shoot raw on the C500 with anamorphic, you get that same thing that we got on the Komodo in its beta form, which is this ridiculously super wide image, and you have to kind of pick the middle of it and scale it up and figure out the mass to kind of get it to match. So yeah, it's a bit of a mission.
Yeah, I was so lucky when we did the John Hopkins thing, because you also filmed 8K on the Monstro or 7K on the Monstro. And so I had a really simple, already in the timeline, something with the aspect ratio that I needed to match. So it was actually quite easy for me to go, oh, okay, well, I've got all this extra real estate on the sides, but as long as I scale it down and it matches there, we're good. So that's an interesting thing. And anamorphic is not part of my workflow really. So I just need to start wrapping my head around it a bit more and figuring out, what the best practices with it are.
Yeah. Nice one. Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we jump into a couple of questions, because it's been great that people are throwing those through. So Dave, you can jump in on these anytime. I'm just going to clear these off for a second. And so
maybe just before we do, I think one thing that could just be worth doing is, because I love that you've got the graphics there with the RED on the left and the Canon on the right. I just wonder whether from both of us, like a first impression of what these delineations kind of mean, because I can see a little bit of a correlation in them. And I think that that's kind of interesting to sort of speak about what those cameras might be aimed at.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, for me, the C70, I still feel like for me personally, if I had to choose on image alone, I'm gonna shoot RED. Like I guess I just know the sensors, I know what I can get out of them, and I just love the image, and especially with RAW, that's what I would shoot. But if I'm being thrown into the heat of a moment and and I'm on my own or I'm with a small crew or whatever, the idea of a C70 with some of these new beautiful looking RF lenses on it, that's me all day. Like that's where I really want to go. I mean, I've got a poll question we'll ask later, which is what feature do you wish was on the C70 and which one do you wish was on the Komodo? So it'll be interesting. People can think about that already. For me, the one on the C70 that defies logic is the friggin' HDMI port on it. Like they've got a BNC timecode port. Why couldn't they have just put a BNC SDI port on that? I mean, it might be protecting their other line kind of, companies are always doing that where they try not to cannibalize previous cameras by just hampering something in a small way. HDMI is just not a professional connector. I mean, there's obviously people have probably got a lot of monitors that are HDMI only, and so it's going to suit some people really well, but those things break. They're just not, they're unidirectional. You've got to have it the right way. They can be hard to get in the heat of the moment, and they protrude out from the side of the camera, and they're just asking to be clipped by some bogan that just snaps off the side of your connector in the middle of a shoot. So for me, like that's probably the biggest one that I'm a little bit disappointed about. Are there any? I guess to be fair, on the Komodo side, there's plenty of stuff there that is a little frustrating. Look, and I'll even admit there's been times I wish there was a HDMI port on the Komodo. It's been more for like weird kind of nerding experiment things or event-based things where I wished it was there. So you both have pros and cons. But what are your feelings on the lineup between the two, and I guess how they compare?
It's interesting because with the SDI thing, I totally hear you that would be, I reckon, the top thing that they should have put in. But I wonder whether if they're in a headspace where they need to try and make something that's going to compete with the A7S III and outdo it, what are the things that are going to make this, standalone? And for me, one of the biggest ones there is actually timecode. And SDI, I totally agree with you, is a much better connector than HDMI. But I actually think if I had to choose between timecode and SDI for the work that I'm doing, I'd take timecode.
I agree with that.
And I say this because I'm on a series at the moment where previously we'd shot it that the A camera, is a C500 or a camera with lots of outputs. So sound is going into that camera. And then the B camera is like a smaller unit. At one stage, it was the A7S3. And this camera would be the perfect B camera for that series because it'll match with the A camera. But because it's a multi-camera documentary environment, having time code that we could sync between those two cameras would be, I think, the deciding factor between a camera getting used or not used. And if you start to scale that up a bit and you think about, okay, this camera is designed to play in a way with C5, C3, all these other units, we're thinking a multi-camera environment. The most important thing for me, again, there is time code. So I'm personally really glad they chose to do time code on this unit because for the sort of stuff I'm doing, that's a huge win. And that's something the A7S3 will not be able to do. Whereas HDMI, I feel you, it sucks as a connector, but at least, you can adapt it and use monitors on it, that kind of thing. Now, if they were in a position where they said, we could do both, but fuck it, let's not because we wanted people to buy the C300 Mark III, well, that fucking sucks. I hope that's not the case. I hope it was more of an engineering thing saying, look, if we want to keep this size and this price, it's one or the other. I kind of get why they probably chose time code. But that's for my usage and other people will have a very different take on it, I'm sure.
I'm 100% with you. I think if I had to choose between timecode and SDI, I would, on a camera at this price point and this size, I'd choose timecode as well. So I think that's a really good point.
It's just so annoying that they're the same physical connector and you look at it and you go, surely.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that gets me is it feels like I was so surprised by how documentary the Komodo was. And I think there's a lot that I would be jealous of in terms of getting that Komodo or that RED image quality in a body for that price. I think there's probably a world in which I end up buying a Komodo as well, because there might be shoots where global shutter and that high-end image work for me. I do think where Canon has... It's interesting to see Canon come out on top with frame rates. That's a real surprise, and that certainly isn't something that's been happening in the history of their cameras. But I think the way that I would look at it is the C70 does feel like, as often has been the case with Canon, they've nailed the form factor usability stuff. So having things like ND, their killer autofocus, XLR, all that stuff just sort of gets you in the headspace that, can I point this camera at something and it's going to work? Yes, that's a solid camera. Where the RED sort of sits to me is this going to have, super high-end RED image quality, but in a really small size? Yes. Am I going to maybe have to add bits and pieces to it to make it as immediately usable as the C70? Sure. I think there's sort of almost a world in which the RED can end up outperforming the C70 in most respects, but you're going to have to put a bunch of bits and pieces on it.
Yep.
The C70 out of the box, for documentary work and for that quick sort of stuff, probably does outperform the RED. But they're really fun cameras to line up against next to each other because I don't think there's a clear answer, for the right user. The Komodo is, like, for you, I mean, that's a camera that a few years ago could have cost $30,000 and would still be appealing.
Yeah, totally.
The fact it's that good and that price is insane. But for, I think, a lot of people who may be, doing social content, corporates, or things that it's just like get it out the door, the C70 is really aimed at that. And it's even got this vertical filming mode where you film it in a 9:16 image, because they kind of know that, well, a lot of people in that end are probably doing stuff for Instagram. So let's just like lean right into that. But yeah, I think, anyway, that's my take, is that maybe the Canon out of the box will just work. The RED out of the box, better image quality, but probably need to do a little bit more to it.
That is 100% accurate, and I can confirm that from personal experience with my Monstro, which I don't even want to tell you how much money I spent on that thing to make it cool for the more documentary factual stuff that I do from time to time. And when I got it to that point, and I was like, yeah, I've made it. And then I took it out on that first shoot with all the bits and pieces on it that I thought I needed. It was just the most impractical thing ever. And I was knocking connectors off, and I was, it was just this, because of how much CAC you had to put on it to try to make this thing usable in that quick response it's run and gun situation. Look, people do it with Reds all the time, but 100%, if I had to choose in those situations where you don't know what's going to happen and you have to just respond, you want to be on one of these I want to be on one of these Canon cameras. And I feel like the Komodo, I've already had plans on how I could pimp that up to kind of make it the more factual and, you know, maybe put a Zoom F6 recorder on the back of it or something like that. But it's never going to be like that you're never going to just whip it out of a bag and be ready to go. It's going to be, oh guys, just hang on a second. I just need half an hour to build my camera. And then you can do the impromptu thing that you were going to do otherwise. You know, that's just never going to work. You have to be able to just have something in a backpack, whip it out and be ready to go. So I think let's get some questions.
But regardless, like, how amazing is it that RED, of all companies, have got to a point where they're actually making cameras like that? Because I just don't think that was ever on their radar to make stuff that was aimed at that market or would be that, that price. I just think that's such a huge change of direction for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, from what I could tell, they were responding to needs of motion picture filmmakers who wanted a crash camera that they could shove somewhere and was cheap enough that they could blow it up and not be worried about it. And like so many things in the film industry,
Michael Bay fight.
Yeah, that's it. And because he does like explosions, like everything else in this industry, people find new uses for it that the manufacturers never really intended, like back in the old 5D Mark II kind of days. So let's just get some questions out because I really appreciate people throwing that stuff through.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Jumping across and jump in anytime you want here, Dave. First up, any thoughts on the C70 not having IBIS, in-body image stabilization, or global shutter? I will probably throw that one to you, Dave. For me, the lack of IBIS, I feel like it's got it, and it works in conjunction with some image-stabilized Canon lenses. Am I right there?
Yeah, I have a weird relationship with Canon's stabilization. So there's mechanical IBIS, which I think is what a lot of people think of first and foremost, and then there's digital stabilization. I try not to use the word IBIS because I think people think that's mechanical, but basically the R5 has mechanical stabilization, which from what I've seen is really good, and it looks like lens stabilization turned up. So you're not getting this weird artificial smoothness. You're kind of just getting something that takes more of the shakeout. Now the C500, the C300, and the C70 have digital stabilization, which, crops the sensor in a little bit. It's kind of like if you've got warp stabilizer running in real time. It's better than warp stabilizer, but you are still subject to some of the downsides that a warp stabilizer effect has. That is to say, works great on wide shots. Like if you want to turn a handheld, shot that's kind of meant to be just a static wide, but you kind of got that going on, it'll smooth that out, no issues. But if you're in tight, it doesn't have as many frames of reference to grab onto, and it can lock onto the wrong things. So I actually don't use the digital stabilization that much. Where I think it's good in the C70 is if you're a vlogger or if you're someone who is doing quick turnaround content, and it being smooth and stable is kind of more important than occasionally having something that goes, ugh. And that we're also at a time now with smartphones where I think people don't care too much if something goes, ugh, if it's that kind of content. The C70 has this insane stabilization system. So it works fine with normal lenses, but on RF lenses, it works even better. It's a personal preference thing. For the sort of shooting I'm doing, I kind of don't use that much, in-body stabilization, digital stabilization, but I know it's a feature they're really hot on for this camera. And I think it's a feature that a lot of vloggers and people who do that kind of handheld stuff and just need something to take a lot of the bounce out of it are going to find really useful.
Nice one, man. Well, as for global shutter, I mean, we kind of covered that earlier. I think that global shutter in cost-effective cameras is pretty new, so I think people are only going to start to find out the benefits of those. I mean, if you're the one place where I wish, I guess, the C70 had it was if you could see yourself being in a situation where you're shooting concerts or music events that involve fast frequency lighting, or you're shooting fashion events where there's photographers going off near you, and because you've got a rolling shutter, you end up with those half illuminated frames because of the way the read reset sensor works. So I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity for the C70. This is us being, I'm not an engineer. I don't know what it takes to put a global shutter inside something that small, so I probably shouldn't sook too much. But you got any thoughts on that, Dave?
Think Canon, I think that the only camera they've got global shutter in, and I could be wrong, I think maybe the C700 has it, maybe. But I don't think there's really any history in their cameras at this level of a global shutter. And same for Sony as well. I think RED it's one of those things that they've got that I don't think other people can touch. Maybe like Canon's autofocus. They've worked out the tech and can put global shutter in a camera at this size and price. In about 5 years, we'll probably see it in most cameras, but I think at the moment that's this like extra feature they have that I don't think anyone else can touch. And what that translates to, you've got a lot more experience with it than I do. There's this really subtle difference in the image that motion cadence is what people sometimes call it.
Yep.
But it's pretty subtle, but it's nice. And it does add this layer of professionalism to the stuff that you can't really fake or replicate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you're doing things like vehicle tracking where you're moving past objects quickly, global shutter's massive. Just quickly on the stabilization and shutter issue, if I can just because I don't want to waste this ridiculous nerdy setup I've got going here, I just want to show you something that I picked up recently, which is, if I zoom in, the Stead XP. Have you heard of this one, Dave?
All right. What have you bought, Dan?
Okay, so this is a Kickstarter. It's a little bit of a plasticky thing at the moment because it's pretty new. The yellow, what looks like the old-fashioned composite port from your Nintendo, is actually for gen lock into the camera. That little 3.5mm jack hole you can see there is to send audio into the camera, and it's sending audio in a similar way to what the tentacle syncs do. Sorry about the bounce on that. The tentacle syncs send this garbled sound, which is actually data going into the audio stream that people use for timecode. In a similar way, this thing's sending stabilization data into your camera stream. So it's filled with gyroscopes and accelerometers, and it tracks the movement of what the camera's doing at the time. You mount it with this not particularly good horseshoe that you can see there. That thing sucks, just FYI, but I've almost got it figured out. In post, then you decide how much of that stabilization you want to apply. And I've got to say, the effects are pretty extraordinary, and it can actually correct rolling shutter in some situations, which is pretty spooky. So I don't want to talk too much about it because I haven't really tested it as much as I want to. But we're actually doing a country music video pretty soon where we're going to be putting that on top of the Monstro actually, and doing some extremely ambitious single shot nonsense that I hope to share with you soon.
Wouldn't be a Dan Grad shoot if it wasn't extremely ambitious single shoot nonsense.
Me and my big mouth, that's what it is, man. I'm just like, all I do is sort of come up with ideas that the budget can't afford and then find a way to try to make them work. I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's going to be a good one though. So thanks for letting me just...
Other questions?
Yes, more questions. So someone's asking a quick one. What was added in the new Komodo firmware update today? Look, a lot of it's pretty boring. Let me just I brought the email up before. So added display of ProRes codec information to playback. Some things to do with lenses is pretty boring. Fixed SDI magnifier with overlay enabled. So the SDI, initially the beta camera, you couldn't send any status out the SDI. All you got was the clean image, which for vehicle tracking stuff or anything like where the camera's on a crane or a remote head or something, that was a real bummer. So now you can do that, and they're tweaking up some of it. The magnifier on the camera is absolutely ridiculous. Like if you want to nerd out with me, I'm just going to connect this guy up to the RED control real quick and show you how quick this magnifier is. It works better when you're actually sitting behind the camera, but compared to the Monstro, time-wise, it's absolutely ridiculous. Sorry, this is boring TV if I'm trying to connect to this thing, isn't it? Okay, let me do that. And
in terms of you have a pretty horrific delay when you try and do a zoom in.
Yeah, that's right. It takes you forever, which again, in the heat of the moment, is way less than ideal. Look, why don't you answer a question while I fart around with that, Dave?
Man, I will happily. I'm looking at the YouTube questions because I forgot to write down the link of the text thing that you said, and I haven't got that. But on the YouTube, I'm going to fly through some. Tim Richardson, looks like only the MP4 Longot plus HFR are 8-bit. That is interesting because I think on this camera you can choose to record MXF, MP4, a bunch of different codecs. So maybe you can choose to record an 8-bit codec. It's just more that out of the box, you do have 10-bit all the way up to 4K 120 frames, which is where a lot of people, and traditionally in the past Canon have fallen over, is to go, now it's 8-bit. It's 10-bit, even the Longop 4K is 10-bit. I can also see someone saying, I've got to explain Bogan to some international viewers here. Fair enough. Bogan is a redneck. So when Dan says a bogan would come past and knock out his SDI cable or his HDMI cable, Dan's from Queensland, so that actually means most people from Queensland.
Oh, dude,
would be both.
That's uncool. Okay, it's true.
Tim saying 100% agree. Canon cripple hammer, timecode BNC, but without HDMI output only. Love the hammer. Big fan of the hammer. I don't know if you can do timecode and SDI on the same port. Maybe you can, and in that case, maybe that hammer is swinging. But I don't think so. And there was one other one that someone else had said. I've heard of this C50. I don't know anything about it. I haven't been told anything about it. I don't know if it exists. I feel like the C70 looks different to a C100. So I don't know whether they'll make something that's in that design. I don't know whether we'll see a C300 Mark III ever, but no idea. All right. I think that's all the ones from YouTube. So sorry, I can't see the ones in the other one.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of other ones here from YouTube. And shout out to Tim Richardson. He's a guy I've shot with in Hong Kong. Tim's a legend. I hope you're holding up all right over there, buddy. It's tricky times over there at the moment. What is the weather seal like on the C70? Do you want to have a crack at that one, Dave?
Apparently it's awesome. So I think what they ran into with the R5 apparently is that in making a weather sealed DSLR body, you can't really have a fan because it will compromise the integrity of the body. So they took overheating issues as a trade-off to having a, like the R5 or 5Ds have always had that really great weather sealing. Apparently on this camera, despite the fact it has a giant fan on the side, the weather sealing is nuts. Canon have really talked it up. This is a really durable body, probably more so even than the C5 or the C3. This thing is designed to be punished. And I think a big part of that means getting caught in the rain. So yeah, I'd say if you're looking for a weather sealed camera, this thing's going to be pretty robust.
There was another question there about whether you think you'd need a better screen when you're shooting with the C70. Have you got any thoughts on that, having used it?
That came up when I talked to the news shooter guys, actually. It's interesting. A lot of people out there, I guess, like EVFs and being able to have something up to your eye. I can 100% see where that would be useful. It would be one of those things that would have been great to have on this camera, but, again, maybe cost and all that. I don't think that's one of the ones where they would have been worried about cannibalizing another product, because even the C5 and the C3, the EVF is a removable thing that doesn't work if you've got V-locks on it. So, yeah, I think I found the screen to be as bright as the C500 Mark II, just when you turn the luminance up in the settings. What I think is probably going to be a third-party accessory that would be quite useful would be to see a Zacuto mount and a loop that you could put over it. And then that way, if you want to have, an eyepiece, you can just basically put your eye right up to it. It's the sort of stuff we used to use back in the 5D days, and it's not great. But, if that's something you want, it would probably be a pretty cheap way to have, an EVF.
Nice one. There's a question here about dynamic range. I don't remember the Komodo dynamic range. If anyone out there wants to Google it and let us know, please feel free to participate in that cool way. Do you want to talk a bit about this DGO dual gain output and how you found the DR on the C70, Dave?
Yeah, so the Canon is saying 16 plus stops of dynamic range, which is the same as the C300 Mark III. That would put it out there. I think what's the Monstro, like 17, they say?
Yeah, that's right.
18. So they're saying the dynamic range is the best that there is. Now, it's interesting because everyone measures their dynamic range differently. I'm sure that once we see this camera more in the hands of third parties, a different number will come out. But it's still going to be really, really impressive. And the way that it works is it's kind of like HDR bracketing. Instead of dual ISO, which can lead to a delay in the way images are processed and is part of the reason why the FX9 has some pretty bad rolling shutter issues with the full frame, dual ISO is not necessarily the best way to get an exposure or better light sensitivity. So Alexa, ARRI have been using DGO dual gain output on the Alexa for some time. And it's one of the reasons why that camera, despite only going up to relatively small ISO ranges, has a pretty amazing dynamic range and a really nice image. So Canon have tried to replicate that. They've implemented DGO, and what it essentially means, and I'm going to get this totally wrong, is that the image is taking an overexposed image, an underexposed image, and sort of smushing it together every time there's a frame. And what that means is that your shadow detail, especially, goes through the roof. So where you see a dynamic range performance increase is that we've tested this, is if you point the camera at a window and expose for the light outside, generally what's inside is going to start being in shadow. It's going to be dark. Compared to the C500 Mark II, shooting with the C300 Mark II, the DGO on that camera, the dual gain output, gives you a lot more detail in that shadow area. So where on the C500 Mark II image, which is, a $25,000 camera, you're seeing quite a lot of noise in those shadows. It's super clean on the C300 Mark II.
Wow.
So Mark III. What that means is that knowing you've got that range in the shadows, you can actually start protecting your highlights more because you're not going to have unusable dark images in the foreground. Therefore, you have this greater dynamic range from the blackest black to the blown out highlight. And it's just an interesting way that when we did the test, we had to go, oh, right, that's how you're getting an increase in dynamic range, as you can see into the shadows more. So don't be afraid of stopping down. That's on the C300 Mark III, exact same technology in the C70 with the C300 Mark III, or I think it's the same sensor, or it's almost the same sensor. It's basically the same tech. So 16 plus stops of dynamic range. You're seeing it when you're using the camera in any mode that has DGO active, and that is any frame rate 4K 25 and below. I think once you start going into higher frame rates, the DGO just automatically doesn't engage because it's just so much processing power. And that's the same on the C300 Mark III. If you're using it at above 50 or 60 frames, the DGO just kind of drops off. So expect that if you want to keep the best dynamic range possible, you want to be as close as you can to 25 frames per second. Anyway, that's a long way of talking about
a lot of
dynamic range.
A lot of really good info in there, man. That was dope. Shout out to Pixelator NYC, who just wants to know how they can be putting that much dynamic range into what I guess a fairly basic codec. So I suppose more on the MP4 side, they're a bit basic. But I mean, I found XAVC to be pretty bloody gradable off my C500. So you haven't found that the DR kind of falls apart on the codec end at all?
No, it's a weird one actually, and it's almost kind of working against themselves, because we found that in the C500 Mark II and the C300 Mark III, it's got RAW, and the idea is that we shoot RAW, you're getting this huge performance increase. And don't get me wrong, RAW is better. You got more color information in that 12-bit RAW file than you have in a 10-bit XFAVC image, but Canon have made a really, really good codec in the XFAVC. So I don't know, like in my head from a broadcast background, 10-bit, is always pretty solid, but it's pretty amazing the level of quality that comes out of the XFAVC codec. So yeah, you don't need to shoot RAW to get that 16 plus stops of dynamic range. It is there in the 10-bit XFAVC codec. And I think that, people should be really comfortable shooting with that codec, knowing that it's pretty high quality. And in a lot of situations, where I have the option to shoot RAW or do I shoot XFAVC, I'll shoot XFAVC, because honestly, the quality boost you get from going RAW, it's not that RAW isn't great. It's that the XFAVC is really good.
Nice one, man. A couple more questions from Slido. Does the C70 support RAW over HDMI? And is the MP4... We kind of covered the MP4 question, so maybe just the RAW over HDMI, which my gut feeling is no, but what would you say, Dave?
No, I don't think Canon ever will. So Canon, it's hard to know whether this is the right approach or the wrong approach, but I guess a couple of years ago, they decided that internal RAW was what they were going to do, same as Blackmagic, same as RED, whereas Sony and Panasonic, and I don't know whether this is because RED owns patents for internal RAW and Canon is licensing stuff or whatever, but other manufacturers are going to do external RAW workflows, and that means RAW over HDMI or over SDI. And that RAW is now usually, I think, ProRes RAW. So if you want to do RAW externally over a A7S III or an FX9, you need certain extra bits that you're going to strap to the camera. But the upside is then you have usually SSDs to record to. So it means that if you're recording RAW, actually you can put a 2 terabyte drive in there and have a lot of space. And that's a great thing because RAW takes up a lot of space. Canon are doing internal RAW. It's their own version of RAW. It's called RAW Lite. It's not as, I think that Blackmagic and RED probably have the edge on the RAW codecs, not because of quality, but because there's different compression ratios that you can choose, which in some ways are sacrificing quality, but you're getting more files. And I think RED and Blackmagic have both got compression ratios that mean you can shoot RAW and still have a pretty good quality and have all that flexibility that comes with RAW. Canon's RAW is still locked to the one sort of size at the moment, and that's a downside. I think often there are situations where I'd maybe go, oh, look, we could shoot RAW on this and then change the white balance in post, but the file sizes just mean that it's not worth it. So, I would not expect to see Canon do external RAW on a camera anytime soon, and that's because they've gone internal RAW. That internal RAW workflow for a lot of people is the selling point of the C500 Mark II or the C300 Mark III over cameras that need external RAW. So, hard to say which is better. I think it's a pretty user-specific thing.
Nice one, man. Jumping back to Slido, what are the actual compression ratios of HQ, MQ, and LQ on the RED Komodo? Someone can correct me here, but if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe that RED have actually released that info, and I'm not sure if they will. It kind of feels a little bit like with the Komodo, they're trying to do a bit of that mentality shift that they did when they came out of the legacy color workflow into the IPP2 workflow, where I think they realized that there's some psychology going around at the moment that says that people actually are less happy if they have more choice. So, we can get deep onto that on maybe another one of my other channels. But it feels like Reds have done better since they've reduced the amount of choice for people when it comes to particularly color space and gamma space choices in their post workflows. And when it comes to the Komodo, it seems like they've just tried to simplify things. Now, for the power user, I guess I humbly refer to myself as a power user. On Monster, I do really like the ability to have that sliding scale of compression where I can really pick where I want to go with it. I'll just cross to the Komodo since we're talking about that. Hey, Komodo, how you doing? But on the Komodo, just those three choices seem to be what they're going to basically, that's all you get. That's all you're getting at the moment. Someone jump in and correct me if I'm wrong.
That's really interesting. I kind of thought that's a bit of a departure for Red, because in my head, Red were like 2 to 1 to 20 to 1. You can choose what your compression is. That's interesting. They've decided not to go down that road.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think again, it's just one of those things where the biggest complaint that people have about Red who aren't hardcore into Red is just that when it comes from the way it gets shot. Like, I was just talking to a DP mate of mine the other day who runs a Gemini, Liam Brennan, and he was saying he's had way too many situations where he's just had these beautiful looks that he's created in camera, and then they get ruined in post by whoever does the grade because they haven't followed his LUTs or they haven't followed his recommended color space settings and things like that. Gotcha. So I think, that idea of too much choice is probably what's hurt Red's reputation in the past. It's a much more what you see is what you get kind of situation, from what I understand with Ari, not being an Ari expert by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, that's the answer to that one. Jumping back to Slido. Hey, Greg.
I think there's actually, sorry, you go.
No, what's that, man?
I was going to say there's an interesting point. I'm going to mangle this. Letten Cert. Sorry, buddy. 15 plus stops on Komodo, and I don't believe Canon sensor has more than 14 plus stops. Even Ari marketing their Alab sensor at 14 plus stop. Yeah, you've really touched on it or nailed it. That I think every manufacturer out there will find a way to measure their dynamic range that says we've got as many stops as we possibly can. I always mentally just take 2 off, So Ari, being Ari, I think are probably the most accurate when they say we do 14 stops. They do 14 stops because they're Germans and they've been doing this forever. And I think it's kind of on companies like them to set the benchmark for the rest of the industry. But everyone else, Blackmagic, Canon, Sony, Red, they're always going to find a way to measure their dynamic range that inflates it.
Yep.
So what I always look for is there's a couple of websites out there that do, a couple of months after a camera comes out, pretty exhausting dynamic range tests. And that's the ones that I kind of look at to see where something stacks up.
Like DxO Mark and pleasantly, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And pleasantly, the C500 Mark II and the C300 Mark III, especially the C300 Mark III, they have these really high claims of dynamic range. But what the actual dynamic range is, really stacks up. I don't think, there has been a shoot that we're doing recently where not long ago you'd say, well, it's going to be on the, the Alexa Mini because that's the camera to use. Now we're looking at the C300 Mark III going, actually, the highlight roll-off, the dynamic range, it's pretty much there. Let's save some of that budget and use 2 C300 Mark IIIs instead of, 1 Alexa. Sorry, James, I'm talking about your shoot. I hope it's going to go really well. Sorry for using you as an example.
Shout out James Gilligan, total legend.
James Gilligan, best colorist in the business.
Love his work. Jumping back to Slido, just quickly to Greg, any positive, negative surprises when using the Komodo? That's probably a really long answer to that question. Negatives, probably the one that comes to mind initially, and while I'm doing it, why don't I just be a wanker and put up the Komodo specs here? Hey, oh, isn't that nice? Probably the RF mount play is the one that really caught me off guard, and it's not a deal breaker because there's ways around it, but the Stormtrooper ships with an RF to EF Canon adapter, and then any lens with any significant weight that you put on that, particularly if you're using it with focus motors, you see a significant amount of play, a rotational play in that mount, and you actually see that in the image. So you see the image tick a little bit if you're pulling focus with a fizz motor. So that's a bit of a surprise that caught me off guard. I've got the Kipitai Revolver RF to EF internal ND adapter coming. That should arrive this week. And that comes with a chin strap, which is this little mount that goes underneath the camera that comes up into the foot of that lens mount that stops any kind of rotation happening. There's a few other companies that have similar things with their mounts. Wooden Camera, I know, have one that really locks it down solid. So just as a quick answer, I'd say that's probably the first negative surprise that came to mind with the Komodo. I've got to be honest, pretty much everything else has been quite a number of very positive surprises, including a little one that I'll just tease you on. You can see up there the little Wi-Fi antenna that's sticking out. If you turn that bad boy on and put your Komodo into infrastructure mode, there's been a few good YouTube videos that show this in much more detail. Infrastructure mode means you're joining the camera to the Wi-Fi of your home or your office or wherever you are. You can then pull that live video stream directly into OBS or vMix or other streaming services just by putting in the IP address of the camera, and then I think it's :9090, and voila, you've got yourself a live vision stream straight out of the Komodo, which is bonkers. So there's little cool Easter eggs like that are popping up more and more. So, I mean, we could probably talk at some point, Dave, about, do you know much about the C70 streaming bits and pieces that they talked about? I know there was a bit of IP video stuff that they teased.
Yeah, I don't. Bit of a letdown for me, even coming from the C200, was the C500 Mark II and the C300 Mark II. The Wi-Fi is not built in. So you've got to get this little dongle. Now, I find that to be a bit of that's, come on. You know, if you had Wi-Fi and cameras that the C200, you know, is like a half prototype of a camera, I think it's something that they probably should have left in the body. The Wi-Fi was never great because it had pretty low latency and that kind of thing. And I get the idea that if you get this little dongle, plug it into the side of the camera, you're going to get, you know, a really good speed. You could probably monitor off it, that kind of thing. But I do think it's something they should have included in the camera. So as far as I know, Wi-Fi connectivity is possible with the C70, with the C500, with the C300, but you do need to get this little dongle. And that's not great. I don't think that's the way to do things in 2020.
Yeah, I'd say, just going back to Greg's question, the other big surprise for me was how low the latency was with that Wi-Fi connection, particularly when you go into the RED Control app. Like it's almost, to the eye, you can't really see the delay in it. It's that the latency is that low.
No way. That's crazy. Because on the C200, it was pretty bad. Yeah. And I was like, oh, well, that's what you get for Wi-Fi inside a camera.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could definitely, in a pinch, monitor off an iPad, and there's loads of people doing it. They've got, you know, iPad minis or whatever mounted on top of the camera, or if you're in a situation where the camera is in a remote position, like a crane or a vehicle tracking situation, you could, as long as you're within range of the Wi-Fi, and there's ways to boost that by putting it through an infrastructure network, yeah, you can. It's entirely usable for monitoring. So that's a big, pleasant surprise out of that whole thing. Jumping to YouTube comments. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you found the RF lenses? I saw you guys had some of those on your Kim Churchill shoot that you did for the C70. How did you find those?
Yeah, they're actually, it's this thing that kind of gets forgotten about, I think, in all of this, and I forget about it, that now having access to those RF lenses is a huge selling point of the camera. Canon, you know, everyone has EF glass or had, and I feel for them that they do need to move forward, and it's going to be a pretty slow transition getting people to start taking up RF glass. But the way to do it is to make that glass really amazing. And so the 70-200, which is a lens I use pretty much on every shoot on my bigger cameras, the 70-200 RF mount is literally half the size. And that is so good. Like, to have a lens that small with that range, with that stabilizer, is just, that's a game changer. And there's a bit of me that goes, shit, like if I could put a 70-200 on a C70, like an RF 70-200, that would actually, I would just rather use that than my C300 Mark III for a lot of things. Because, with lens attached, you're looking at a setup that's half as big. But, because the new RF lenses are so good, there's other features with them that you don't have on the traditional EF ones. So the 15-35, which is sort of your go-to wide angle lens, it now has an image stabilizer in it on the RF mount. There's all these different contact points now inside the rear of the lens. And what that means is that there's a control ring on RF lenses. So you have your zoom, you have your focus, and there's a third ring that you can map to be whatever you want. So you could conceivably have zoom, focus. I'm just going to change my ISO with the ring on the front of the lens.
Wow.
And that's the kind of stuff that once that tech kind of gets to a point where we have an RF C300 Mark III or an RF C500, which I assume we will at some stage, that's going to change the way that I shoot, and I'm pretty envious of users out there who the C70 and an RF lens on the front of it would be their first kind of Canon cinema camera, because they're going to get to experience a way of shooting that will be pretty great. That's going to really keep you kind of quick and agile. So we used 70-200 2.8 IS RF mount. We used a 15-35, and we used a 35mm 1.8. All those lenses have an image stabilizer in the lens. We chose to use lenses that have an image stabilizer to give us smoother handheld coverage. But again, we didn't use the built-in image stabilization. I should actually just quickly point people that they want to see the videos that we're talking about. We made some launch content for Canon Australia. And if you go to Canon Australia's YouTube channel, you'll find a music video, sort of live performance video we filmed, and a behind the scenes of that, just if you're looking to get an idea of what we shot. The other thing that's interesting, and my first thought was this was going to cross over to Komodo world, was this speed booster that Canon's made. So Canon already have an EF to RF adapter. I've got it actually on the camera I'm using now as a webcam. That's nothing special. It just basically means that if you have EF lenses, you can use them on the RF mount. It's totally seamless. All the autofocus, everything passes through perfectly. It's a Canon official product.
It's probably the same one that's on my Komodo now. It's a pretty good chance. Yeah.
Yeah, it just means that like no stress. They know a huge chunk of users are going to have EF glass and want to use them on the C70, and there's no downsides to that. But they've also made this speed booster thing. Are you across this?
Yeah. So there's a question that actually helps with a question there from Tim. That might be legend Tim Richardson there. What's up with the C70 speed booster, which sounds like we're about to get into. I mean, the bits that I've seen of it are, for anyone who doesn't know what a speed booster does, it's where you're taking a lens that's capable of covering a full frame sensor, putting it onto a camera that's Super 35, which is a smaller sensor, optically reducing the taking ability of that lens into the smaller sensor space, giving you an extra stop of light, which is pretty cool. So if you're shooting with like an f4 lens, it becomes an f2.8 lens, and it also gives you greater field of view. I think that's all correct, Dave. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they've already announced that there will be speed boosting for the C70. So far, from what I saw, there's only 3 lenses that are officially supported by it in terms of full support, like the IS and electronic capabilities. Is that your kind of understanding of it, Dave?
Yeah, it's mental. I can't believe Canon's made this. Like, I was, when I got shown the product for the first time, I was like, oh yeah, cool, C70, that makes sense. And then they were like, here's our speed booster. I was like, what the fuck? Like, you guys don't make that stuff. So I got used to using speed boosters on the FS7, and I kind of hated them because, it was great to get, I could take a 24-105 to be 2.8. The 24-105 would sort of then become like a 15-70 essentially. So like a really great focal range. But the fucking things were so unreliable. Like, you have this extra point of contact in the camera that lenses suddenly you'd stop, you'd lose your f-stop control, or you'd lose this, and you're shooting through this other glass, and it was always a pain in the ass. So what they've done basically is say, I think, we know that full frame is this thing that people want. We know that the A7S III is full frame, that the FX6 when it comes out is going to be full frame. So if you want to be full frame, we're going to give you that option. it's not a just click it on adapter. You actually have to unscrew the 4 mounts at the front of the C70, the 4 screws, take off that mount, put this adapter on there. But essentially, if you want a C70 to be full frame, you can. And that, again, these are things that this company, that Canon's doing, that you just wouldn't think that they would do a few years ago. I think they're far more focused on being competitive and responding to changes in the market than they have been in the past, because that's the sort of thing that I feel like is really, taking a left turn in the way to think about it. How are we gonna make a camera full frame, but still keep all the things in it that we want because it's a Super 35 sensor? Let's give people this option. So this is, again, where I think this little C70 is going to become something that I'm envious of as someone shooting on larger cameras. To be able to take a 24-105, which is not the sharpest lens in the world, but it's got an amazing stabilizer in it, chuck it on a speed boosted C70 and effectively have a full frame look. So a really nice wide angle when you want it, but also have the zoom range, that is better than what you get on a 24-70, plus have the image stabilizer that comes with a 24-105. That is like an unbeatable documentary combination, because you're not at f4 anymore, you're at 2.8 because you get that extra stop of light, 2 stops. That's amazing. And I thought when they announced it, I didn't clock that it was something you had to screw in. And I was like, mate, all the Komodo users are going to lose their shit, because suddenly the Komodo, $6,000, US RED will be full frame, and they can put this RF, adapter on it. But the fact they've made it screw in, I wonder whether they knew that was something people were going to try and do, and they said, not today.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be the speed booster question comes up on the RED forums, the Komodo forums every day. People are always asking, is there one? Does it work? And the answer is generally, yeah, not really. It can be pretty sketchy. I think you're dead right. Like, Canon's been super smart by making this something that could end up, we don't know the details yet, but could end up being kind of proprietary to the C70, and I think it's incredible. Like, if they can pull that off, there's the other mount options. Like for the Komodo, there is a Canon RF to EF that has a drop-in filter slot that has a very ND option. All reports are that that's dog shit, but there's a third-party company making not very ND but just single ND drop-in filters, which behind the lens filtration can be handy. That saved my ass in so many situations. So if they can have good quality ND glass that goes in behind, that's going to be cool. So yeah, I think Canon is sort of, they're playing we want to help some of the other companies and be collaborative, but just comes out of left field with something of their own that no one else can have, that kind of boxes out the competition. That's all fair in business, fair in love and war. I can understand them doing that. So just quickly cleaning out these last Slido questions. Thanks heaps to everyone. Shout out to Rowan Walker, who was the guy who told me my windsock looked crap. Always appreciate the fashion conscious feedback there. And yeah, I do come from an event background, so solidarity to my AV nerd brothers and sisters. Tim, buttons on the C70 make it better to use in the field versus Komodo touchscreen. You're probably the man to mostly jump on that one, Dave. I'll just say the other reason why I bought a C500 Mark II after shooting with Reds for over a decade was the buttons. Like, I found myself graduating to the cuddle cam mode of shooting that so many people have embraced, and Dave, in no small part, motivated me to do that. And when you've got a camera sitting there and you're chatting to someone and you're responding to things quickly, just being able to surreptitiously dial in settings that you know where the buttons sit, and you can do it without breaking eye contact with a person. You can never do that on a RED. It's like tap, wait, slide, wait for the GUI to catch up, 30 seconds later you've got your setting. Whereas on these cameras, you can get there so much quicker. So again, it's really, for me, it's pointed so much at that run and gun, quick response kind of shooting. But how did you find the button placement and the kind of shortcuts that you had on the C70 when you used it, Dave?
Yeah, it's actually, they've nailed it with that sounds like a weird thing to get excited about, but I'm with you, buttons, like, they nailed it. One of the things that I really like is that I actually use my autofocus and magnification simultaneously. So one of the things I like to do is I don't generally leave my autofocus on, but I trigger it on and off because I trust it more than I trust my own eyes. So if I'm talking with someone, doing a little interview like you say, I'll generally have face detection autofocus on, and I'll just trigger it on and off every now and then, just between questions, just to make sure that the subject is where they are. but I don't necessarily want it locking on and constantly being on them because I don't, I want it to still look kind of human. With the C70, they've now got so many buttons near your thumb that I can have the autofocus trigger button there. And then I can also have the magnification button right next to it. So I can actually just trigger my autofocus on and off and then just hit magnify and zoom in and check focus with my own eyes and not have to move the camera at all.
And can you magnify while rolling? Is that doable on
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, because I'll admit I haven't tried that on the Komodo yet, but you can't do it on on a usual DSMC2 camera while you're rolling. You can't magnify, so that's an interesting one.
Fuck, ouch. Yeah, and the other thing there is that when you've got Canon's face detection enabled, you don't necessarily have to use it as face detection autofocus. You can basically, on manual focus, still be detecting a face, and what that means is that when you hit magnify, it will automatically magnify to the face. It won't just go to the middle of frame, it will go to their eyeball. And as you can imagine, that's so handy because it just means you're really intuitive. You're like, oh, I want to check focus on their eye, make sure I'm sharp. I just hit one button, it's gone right to their eye. I can see that I'm sharp, I zoom out. But yeah, manual buttons are good. Canon's also taken some cues from Blackmagic, I think, in that there is a touch screen function to this camera that they haven't had on other cameras. On the back of the menu, if you go to newsshooter.com, I've sent them some stills, you can see there's a little button you hit and it brings up a quick access menu. And that's got things like ND, white balance. And you can hit another button, go into a touch menu for frame rates, for resolutions, all that kind of stuff. So they're slowly getting away from having everything buried in different menus, even though the Canon menu systems are really intuitive, that you can have quick access to just turn on some settings as you need them. And to be able to throw 10 stops of ND into a camera with one button press and it just goes chunk, that's really good.
That's awesome, man. I'm just pulling up that news shooter article so I can show people the bit you were talking about. Okay, thanks for the pop-up.
Someone here is saying, I thought the screws were optional on the Canon Speed Booster. That would be really interesting. I don't know. I just saw the screws and assumed that it only works if you rip the mount off and essentially screw it in. I actually hope that, if this is something that can be used across different cameras, that people get into it, because I think it's really amazing that RED decided to go with RF for the Komodo. And I think it would be nice to almost reward them for making that decision by allowing RED users to use the speed booster. I don't think people would choose between Komodo or C70 versus the fact it's full frame. So I think, why not? I think other people should have that option.
Yeah, just going through, I 100% agree with that, man. I think it would be great if the things democratize as much as possible, but, companies have got to protect their IP, so you kind of get it. So yeah, you've got some great stuff here on that news shooter article. It's an excellent place to get really, really deep into the tech nerdery of this. Dave's done a ton of work with it, and yeah, highly recommend. I recommend news shooter in general, and I recommend that article in particular. I might chuck something in the notes to it later so you guys know. I'll just jump back into Slido here.
I've got another one here from RWTD saying, do you think that RF Cine Glass is a while away from Canon, something we might see soon? Bloody good question, honestly. I'd be surprised that they make Cine lenses in RF soon, because at the moment there aren't really any Cine bodies aside from the C70 that are RF mount. I suspect what we would see is that they'll do a new version of the C300 Mark III or an RF mounted cinema camera and have a lens that goes along with that to sort of say, hey, guess what? We're now doing this. They'd need to make it a pretty special lens though, because you're basically saying to people, hey, you're going with an RF cinema camera. You're either using sort of not EF glass, but L series glass, or this, new lens. But I think that they're pretty RF into the tech. Like, from what I understand, being RF and the number of data point connections that offers and the way that mount works, it really has let Canon do some pretty freaky things with lenses. So yeah, I hope it's just a matter of time before we see more and more of those lenses, because from my limited experience with them, they're pretty awesome.
That's awesome, man. Just last one from Slido from Josh Miller. I think we've kind of covered the speed booster second part of his question. He is asking about low light, which is probably a good one to quickly touch on. Did you have any feelings from your use of it, Dave, on how it goes in the low light conditions?
Yeah, so if anyone wants to watch that performance video, we took a bit of a weird approach to it. We were trying to figure out ways to kind of showcase I guess, low light sensitivity. And what we decided to do was film the entire video in about that 25 minutes you get after the sun goes below the horizon, but it's not fully dark. So that whole clip is all filmed without any sun. The sun had set. So we were trying to basically show that even in those kinds of situations where you start dialing the ISO up a bit and, light's becoming an issue, that the image you get out of the camera is still incredibly clean. CVP have done a great test looking at ISO noise on their YouTube channel that sort of goes up through the range to say, here we are at 5 stops under exposure. The ISO is, 20,000 or something like that. And now it's starting to look a bit rough around the edges. It's such a personal preference, but I think that they're pretty on the mark with what they think is an acceptable level of ISO noise. Look, I think it's amazing. It's probably not as good as the A7S III because that's a, freaky 12 megapixel sensor that Sony have just spent all their time making that low light performance the thing. But it's certainly good enough for documentary work. I'm really impressed with it. Someone also, Pharaoh's Kingdom, has said, how could they not put RAW in the camera? It's a good question. And we talked about internal RAW versus external. I don't think they could have kept the camera at this price using this media and had internal RAW because the CF Express cards are $1,000 Australian dollars per card. I can see why they'd want to go SD instead for a camera like this. Canon aren't really in the business of external RAW. But I think the other thing is that people maybe, it's great to have the option. And I really, think that everyone should want to have the option to use RAW if they do want it. But I think maybe people are a little bit more hung up on RAW than they need to be. XFAVC on this camera is phenomenal. And like I said, I will shoot XFAVC till the cows come home on my C500 over RAW because of how solid that codec is. Don't be wrong, I think it's great to have RAW if you've got the option, but I don't think it's the sort of feature that should make or break a camera in this part of the market, because I would really be surprised if people will see the benefit of shooting RAW for most things. Certainly Blackmagic and RED give you that option, and that's great. But, I'd say don't knock the XFAVC until you try it, because I saw it on the news shooter comments. A lot of people are really hyped on RAW, but I'm just not sure how many people are actually shooting RAW, because once you start to factor in file sizes and all that kind of thing, it actually isn't as great as you think it is.
Yeah, I'd 100% back that up. The first time you turn on RAW on a C500, if you're not used to it, and then you go to transfer the files, there's a massive sphincter cleansing gulp moment of realizing what you've just done to your post workflow. So yeah, I haven't used, since doing that first clip on it where we did the anamorphic thing in RAW, I haven't turned RAW on once on my C500. I just don't use it for that. I don't need it. Like, I'd much prefer if I get my settings right, I know I can recover sky detail on XF AVC. I can bring back in skin if I need to. Like, they're so gradable. I've been, absolutely stoked with it. Quick one from Pixelator NYC. What kind of headpiece are you using? Thanks for noticing. Oh, look, let's just come in close on that. Hi, how's it going, everyone? This is a DPA Define 66, I believe it is. So these little headset mics are kind of, the standard issue for theatre performers and cool people like that. TED Talks, whatever. The cool thing about this one is it's got an integrated earpiece. So there's a little kind of combo cable that runs down, and I'm actually wearing two belt packs. I've got one that's the transmitter for the mic and one that's the receiver for the earpiece. So I'm wirelessly hearing Dave and chatting to you guys. So yeah, not cheap, but I don't know. I'm just a wanker. That's the bottom line. But thanks for the question, and thanks for noticing.
And say something before I get obliterated. But I totally get that. This is a video that Dan Red Monstro Dan is hosting. This is an audience that loves RAW, and I 100% get that. I'm more speaking from the perspective of someone who doesn't use RAW that much in my workflow, and maybe trying to point out for those people who, for cameras like the RED, the RAW is a huge part of the selling point of that camera. I guess I'm just trying to say that maybe at this point of the market, for what Canon's trying to do, even for the users that probably they're talking to, RAW maybe isn't seen as the priority it is for people who are coming from a RED background. Now, we may be, in the next couple of years, especially with the way Blackmagic has kind of pushed things, seeing RAW as a pretty essential part of any camera's lineup. But I think also looking at the FX9's implementation of external RAW workflows, it's been interesting to see people maybe getting really hopped up on wanting RAW, but actually those cameras are more built to be solid sort of 10-bit or even 12-bit documentary shooting cameras. The RAW side of it isn't necessarily the way that they're selling the camera or the audience that they're trying to appeal to. That's, and I think if you want RAW, the Komodo is 100% the way to go. Like, you're not going to get a better quality codec than RED RAW. So if that's important to you, then that's where you should be, I think.
Yep, well said. Just so you know, on the Slido side of things, if anyone wants to, I've just put up a poll there. So if you pull your phones out again and open up Slido, which feature do you wish the C70 had? And we'll ask the same question later about Komodo. So that's an open question. You can chuck in any text you want so that we can kind of get a feel for people's vibes on that. So if you want to participate on that one and give us, that might trigger some more discussion. We're getting close. I don't want to take too much more of Dave's time, so we are going to wrap things up soon, but just wanted to keep the bi-directional participation going. I think we've covered pretty much all of the questions from the YouTube end of things, Dave. Is there anything else that sort of comes to mind for you in terms of how this experience has been or what you're excited about going forward?
Just some weird little features that are kind of interesting, that are just things that, like, they're not necessarily the forefront of any spec sheet, but just stuff that I found was kind of cool using the camera. The autofocus works at like 120 frames per second. So I think that's the tracking autofocus as well. And what Canon are kind of saying, that if you're filming a sport event or a car race, or not that we are in a world at the moment where any of those things are happening, but that they could see this being a really amazing feature, to be able to film at 120 frames per second and have an autofocus that can keep up. That's pretty amazing. Also, there's an audio track that gets recorded at that 120 frames per second. And so I think that that's stuff that, it's not, again, like a big selling point of the camera. I think it's more that stuff you're using it, you go, oh, that's kind of handy. They've got a tripod screw in the side of the camera, so that if you were to film on the side using that vertical filming, that's something that you can do. You can basically turn the camera into a weird side-on rig without having to buy all these extra mounts. So that's kind of handy. Sorry, finish. Oh dear, I meant RAW is mostly important for people who like talking about cameras more than using them. I feel you. Sorry. I think that it's still interesting, because I think a lot of people, if you look at the lineup, all the cameras being announced at the moment, Blackmagic 12K, Red Monstro, and you see that a camera doesn't have RAW, I think that it's pretty fair. You go, oh, I want my camera to be able to do this. And I think that it's kind of, whether that's people using it every day or not, I think it's interesting, fair enough to have stuff like that, which clearly sits in a pro or a for and against column on a camera. But anyway, thanks for bringing it up. Sorry, I kind of stumbled through the answer on it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that is really interesting about that.
Well, we've got two responses in.
C70?
I was going to say we've got two responses in for features they wish the C70 had. Fairly predictable. SDI and global shutter. Surprised no one's put RAW in there, but maybe you've answered that question well enough, man. So nice work there. Anybody else, feel free to jump in if you want to participate on that one. But yeah, was there something else you were thinking of there, Dave? Sorry, I interrupted you.
External recording with the C70. You can use, I think, just like you can with the C300 Mark III or the C500, you could use a Ninja or an external recorder to get, I think it's 4K 50 frames externally, in presumably whatever flavors of compression you want to do on your external recorder. I think there's definitely a world in which you could chuck a Ninja on top of this camera and sort of use that as a larger screen if you wanted to. It's just nice that, unlike the C200, you don't have to use an external recorder to get 10-bit. Hopefully that's something that Canon has now put in the past, where they hold back on those sorts of codecs. I'm just going to have a quick look. I had a little note document of stuff that was in the camera that I just thought was interesting. Touchscreen, tripod mount, stabilizer, back of head autofocus, apparently.
Actually, one thing I just might jump in on there, I want to just back up your comments before about it recording audio in slow and quick modes. I reckon that's huge and probably something people are sleeping on a little bit. Like some of the nicest sort of travel, particularly in that travel video kind of end of things, or anything that's got a bit of a stylized approach to it, where you're shooting off speed, but you can hear the nat sound coming through. if you're again out there in the field doing that on your own, not having to worry about going and getting the sound separately or carrying an audio recorder around, knowing that even though you're shooting off speed, you're still getting an audio track that's related exactly to that moment in time is massive. The other thing that does open up is that little Steady XP thing that I showed you before. That needs the camera to be recording audio to be able to activate that stabilization data. So the C70 really opens that up. I mean, you can't do it on Komodo so much because its limitations in frame rate, but other cameras, you can crank your base frame rate up to 50p, for instance, and get audio on some cameras that can't do it in in very speed mode or slow and quick mode. So there's ways around it, but there's nothing better when you're out in the field than, being able to actually shoot very speed so that you can play back the content without needing a computer and actually see the effect of the slow motion, particularly if you're with clients, being able to go, hey, look at this cool shot. Straight out of the camera, but having an audio track with it, which the C70 does, I reckon that's pretty massive. So, yeah, nice one.
There's someone here as well who sort of has said it's perfect for gimbal work. Yeah, absolutely. We used it on a Ronin S, which is probably it all depends on the lens. Hey, so we used it on the Ronin S with the 15 to 35, and that felt like it was pushing the limits of the balance because that lens is kind of large and heavy. But I suspect that on the Crane S3 and probably the new Ronin S2 that's coming, this is the camera for that. And I've been able to get my C500 or the C300 to fly on a gimbal as well, but it does involve a bit of work and de-rigging and balancing. So kind of awesome that there's such an amazing camera that's designed for that sort of gimbal workflow, right out of the gate. Audio inputs as well. You've got a scratch mic that you can turn on and always be recording a scratch track of audio. So that's really handy. But you can also select to use the 3.5mm jack to record into channels like 3 and 4, and then XLRs into channels 1 and 2. So if you wanted to, you could record, a radio mic on channel 1, a radio mic on channel 2, and then have a tiny Rode, shotgun mic on the top of the camera recording sort of Atmos onto channel 3 and 4. That's really cool because I think that's kind of fitting that idea of a run and gun documentary. It's all happening in the camera. It's nice that they haven't held back on that stuff because that's sort of a feature you'd expect to see in the larger cameras.
Nice one, man. I've just triggered the final poll, which feature you wish the Komodo had. We've already got a response there. Higher frame rates on 6K, yeah, and I think we'd also like free beer, which would be really cool. I think in a camera that small, not to be harsh on the comment, I think I'd love the same thing too. In a camera this small, there's got to be trade-offs somewhere, so I can kind of understand that they haven't been able to pull that one off. PL mount, look, you can get really good PL mount adapters. The Kipatai RF to PL is a great one from what I've heard. I've got the RF to PL on my, let's be a nerd, on my Monstro. So that's the Revolver RF to EF, actually, because I run most of my lenses in EF these days just because I find it's a lot more convenient for lens changes when I'm alone in the field. While we're here, let's just look at the majesty of this little softbox system that I've put together. Hang on, I've got to pull focus on this little thing manually. So that's the new RED base plate for Komodo, which I can show you guys close up. So I've just got a couple of 24 Falconized softboxes and a DS1 digital Sputnik. What's that called? That's the soft blade as the little light over the top. And then underneath here, you've got the Kessler second shooter running in turntable mode. That's enough of that. Sorry, it's a bit shaky there. It's a bit hard to hold. So if I cross over to the Monstro there real quick, you can see, and I'll just come back on the Lauer Super Scope, you can see you've got there a whole lot of nice 3/8 with ARRI locator pins threads around the sides of this base plate. The bottom of it's made to go with touch and go receivers. So GDU, Global Dynamics United, which is Jared, the head of RED, it's his sort of skunkworks company. They make a really nice one. It's 80mm, which I think goes with some of the other standard ones. Wooden Camera make a touch and go that would fit that. And if we cut to the heat of the meat, just coming around shortly, you'll see the outputs on this. So it's going to give you some of your GPI and Genlock and timecode and things like that, as well as kind of giving a little more clearance to the Komodo. Because one thing I find is it can be a little bit hard to match it up with your standard rigs when it's such a small camera body. Once you put sometimes a tripod base plate's just nowhere near enough clearance to be able to do that. So you can see there's the outputs on the new unit there. So you get the control port. I think they're still working on which third-party things are going to work with that protocol. I'm hoping the RT Motion guys start to talk to that soon. And then you got your GPI, Genlock, and time code. So to stop me from just being a wanker and nerding out on that, Dave, have you had any other thoughts or questions come through on YouTube since then?
Yeah, last two things I might hit really quickly. Someone was asking about Sigma Art series lenses compatibility. I did a bit of a test with a 35mm and a 24-70 and found that the autofocus was working with both those lenses using the RF to EF adapter. So yeah, totally compatible. I don't think you'll have any issues there. And Shazam, the iPad producer, says, Dave, how do you feel about being able to take the C70 in any place versus a huge C300 Mark III? C70 looks like a photo camera versus a film camera. Mate, you're 100% right. So on a series I'm working on at the moment for Netflix, earlier in the year, the director went across to Vegas to film some stuff. He took an FS5 Mark II with him into an Atomos recorder because, the larger cameras weren't going to cut it. This was before we had the C500 Mark II to use on this series. But anyway, there's definitely worlds in which having a small camera outweighs the benefits of the big one. And I think that is a huge part of the market that's going to be really into the C70. There are shows that I've worked on where having big shoulder mounted cameras just aren't an option for all kinds of reasons, be it sneaking things in or just trying to keep a low profile around talent, So yeah, I think that you're so right. That's a big part of that market. And that's what's kind of interesting is that almost think about it in three ways. You've got people who this is probably their first sort of dedicated video camera who might be coming from a mirrorless or DSLR background. The C70 has a lot to offer them. People who have a C300 Mark III or a C500 Mark II and want a B camera that matches perfectly with all the different color profiles and codecs. You've got those people as well. And then the third option would be people who in another world might be using a C500 Mark II or a larger camera for documentary work, but they need to keep a low profile or they want that portability and 400 minutes of battery life out of a BPA 60. I think that's also aimed at them. So it's sort of a camera that I think is going to appeal to quite a few people across the market.
Awesome. Just one last question from YouTube, and then we'll look at wrapping things up, I think, from FF Finish. Does that stand for Full Frame Finish? If not, it's a dope name. If so, if it's a dope name.
Finish.
How does timecode behave in 120 frames per second? Could you sync two cameras using the timecode connector? This is a really good question. I used to use as my B cam for a little while the Panasonic EVA 1, which I liked for a whole lot of reasons and didn't like for a couple of others. One of the things that caught me out on a pretty big shoot was wanting to shoot off speed in camera, but broadcast in real time to clients or for an event to sort of massive projection screens. And we tried to timecode sync it to the Monstro, and on the EVA, at least when you're in very speed mode, which is like their slow and quick mode, it kills timecode, so you don't get that benefit anymore. So Dave, did you have any happen to have any experience with timecode when shooting off speed?
No, because we didn't do that much off speed on our multicam, but what James and I came up with for some shoots we were doing recently was that we would occasionally drop into 120 frames per second on the C300 Mark III to get slow-mo stuff, and then want to quickly jump back to being timecode synced. Because once you go into off speed, the camera thinks that time is 4 times as fast as it is, so your camera jumps into the future. Or is it the past? I can't remember. It drops out of sync. We would just have a BNC timecode SDI cable hanging off the camera. And as soon as we were finished shooting at 100 frames, quickly plug it into the other camera and jam sync it. Now, you don't need an extra piece of equipment for that. You don't need a box. You just need the timecode port on the C300 Mark III and the timecode port on the C500 Mark II. So it was really nice that just with one cable, you could jam sync your timecode. What you can get is, tentacles and little devices like that or a locket box, that will force timecode into the camera. And so what I'm guessing and what I hope is that when you drop out of 100 frames per second and you go back to 25, that locket box can then jam the timecode back to what it was. So if you're doing multicam stuff and you're constantly jumping in and out of timecode and you want to keep that sync, one of those kinds of devices might be the best way. But otherwise, a really low-fi way of doing it is to just have a cable hanging out of your camera, and as soon as you stop shooting 100 frames, just go and sync yourself back up.
Nice, man. While you were talking, I just grabbed this guy just as a quick example. So that's the UltraSync 1. So that's a company called Timecode Systems. It's now been bought out by Atomos, so it'll be interesting to see what Atomos does with that. I use this on all my shoots. I've got 3 of them. Plus, I've got one that's a Bluetooth version that actually sends Bluetooth timecode to my Zoom F6 recorder. It can also send Bluetooth timecode to an iPad, so you can have a digital slate to hold up in front of the camera if you want. And yeah, I mean, this thing, they're worth every penny to me in terms of my workflow. And RED's actually got it figured out. So RED, I've often done shoots where I'm rolling 50 frames vary speed, so I can still play it back to the client at the correct slow-mo. And I'm running audio to my F6, which I wear around my waist like a really sexy guy, and that's got timecode lock. And then in post, it totally works. Like the RED holds its timecode in vary speed, which is great. I'll just sync it all up using the Tentacle Sync app, because I used to own Tentacle Sync. Sorry, guys, Tentacle Sync that I'm using your software with someone else's hardware. And then all you have to do is you've got all your slow-mo sitting there on the timeline, and if you spot a shot where you wish you had lip sync because someone was talking to camera or something happened, you just 200% that clip and it's perfectly in sync. So it's a pretty powerful workflow for having dual system sound but still being able to sync it and having slow-mo. So I'm hoping more companies figure out how RED did that, because it is something that seems to be a little rare. Have you had any other experience with that, Dave?
No, and I'd hope that you'd have the same options with these cameras, but I can't say whether you do or don't. We didn't get that far into it. But it's interesting because suddenly, time code, it's not important until the shoot that it is. And you're like, shit, we need to have this quickly and easily figured out.
Yeah, I think the main reason why timecode became so important to me was because I was a RED shooter, and audio, many people know audio on REDs sucks. So I rapidly became a dual system sound guy, and just knowing that I always had the F6 is amazing. I'll get into that in another episode, but the thing that things let me do with in terms of 32-bit float, in terms of the limiting power on it, auto mix, things like that, having that around your waist and knowing that you're always getting quality sound, even though the RED might be doing whatever it's got to do, but you can match it all back in post at the end, is super, super powerful. I just want to I think we should probably wrap it up so we squeak into the 2-hour, that feels like a good spot. Do you think, Dave? How are you feeling?
Yeah, man, I'll have to jump off, so let's do it.
Okay, I just want to show one last quick thing. So this is for the Komodo guys at home. This is the I was about to say off Hollywood, that company doesn't exist anymore. Modern Film Tools top plate for the Komodo, which again gives you, let me just hold up, I'm just going to stop that turntable real quick, hold it up for you. So you've got a few control ports and external ports there. Time code again, and this time it's 5-pin LEMO, which is the more standard one that soundies with sound devices, recorders and things are going to have. You've got a run stop there, which I think is a Fisher protocol, couple of rosettes. Look, the build quality is not amazing, I've got to be honest. These, if I just stand this thing up here, if you have a look at these 3/8 threads they've got on there, have a look at those ARRI locator pins. Can anyone else see the fact that they're not equidistant? So I tried to put something in that yesterday, and it just didn't happen because the holes aren't accurate. They're not equidistant out from that center 3/8 hole. So hopefully the guys will sort that out. But regardless, it's still a pretty cool option. I mean, for the most part, my Ignite Digi Keystone hasn't left my Komodo. It's not on there right now because I was trying a few different rigs, but that Keystone's been the best cage for me that I've pretty much ever had for a camera. It's been super, super flexible. But yeah, some of these it's just an example of the fact that these third-party ecosystems are starting to crop up around Komodo, even though the camera's still in beta. There's already companies making some pretty cool things for it. So I think that was the last show and tell I was going to do on my wanky turntable rig. No other questions have come through on YouTube, so I think I'm going to take this chance to say a massive thank you to Mr. Dave May, who is an erudite, gentleman, scholar, ledgehammer, all-around good guy and an extremely good shooter. Dave, mate, thanks so much for being with us.
Mate, I'm just going to have to hope that erudite isn't a bad thing because, anyway, I really appreciate it.
Educated.
It's a lot of fun getting on here and talking about it.
Sagacious. You're one who possesses great perspicacity, so I think I appreciate that about you. So, yeah, thanks very much,
Well, man, I just, thanks for putting something like this together, and, happy to be on it anytime you like because it's a lot of fun to talk about this stuff. And just genuinely, though, a huge thanks to everyone who asked questions because, it's a really it's nice to have this kind of chance to chat with people properly about this stuff. So, thanks everyone who took the time to write in and ask us stuff.
Well, thanks heaps, man. And for me, I just wanted to say the channel's going to grow pretty quickly, I hope, in terms of the content I'm going to put out there. I've got some really nerdy episodes planned soon, both pre-produced ones and hopefully a lot more live episodes. Some stuff on slow-mo with the Chronos HD camera. We're going to be covering this insane single-shot country music video that I'll be doing soon. And I'm looking to do one that kind of demystifies RAW, both in terms of how you shoot it and how you post-produce it. So hopefully that's going to be a benefit to people. So as always, hit me up in the comments. Try to get back to as many people as possible. If you can, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's definitely super appreciated. You can like the Facebook page. There's plenty of activity happening over there. So that's it. I think I'll sign off. And I'm pretty sure I've got some kind of outro file, but I ran out of time to put it on my nerdy Stream XL. So I have to kick this old school, use my hand to hold a mouse, which is weird. And then I click this thing. Yeah, man. Last goodbye from Dave. Wave, Dave. Thanks, man. You're a legend.
See you guys.
Talk soon, man. See you, everybody.